record button there. And we will record it, and then we'll make the presentations available, at least the first two ones, because the third one might be maybe more interactive, but the first two ones will be available in our website very soon. So I don't know what's on the screen there. Jesus, do you have the agenda there on the screen? Or
yes, I will share the agenda. Here it is.
Perfect. So, I mean, I've already welcomed you, so it's not going to take more time now. What we're going to do is listen to three different presentations. The first one will be delivered by Alan. Alan, thank you very much again for being here. We always count on you to explain us more about the content of the call, the policy, the reasoning behind it, and also the eligibility criteria. As you all, I guess many of you know Alan already. He's the head of sector at the Research Executive Agency. We have around 50 minutes, and I guess that will include all the questions that you from the audience may have. So the idea there is that both Jesus and I will be moderating the chat. So we will take the questions that can be answered by Alan, and if any remain, then we will ask you to send the question directly to the MSCA at oficinaeuropea.es. That's our mail, and we will be able to redirect or answer them. The same will follow with the presentation for Bogdan from the Universidad Rovira e Virgili as a beneficiary of one COFUND project, actually two COFUND projects, and that will also give us their insights on how to prepare a good proposal. That will be around half an hour, and then we will have the last presentation, who will be more interactive, conducted by Julian Sauer. Julian is the coordinator of an ongoing postdoc COFUND in Switzerland, and she's also the director of Oxygenium. So around 2 hours and a half with you now, and with just this initial welcome, I want to pass the floor on to Alan to start his presentation. So if that's okay with you, if you can all, I think you all have all muted mics and turn off the camera, and we'll just leave Alan to ensure that the connectivity works fine. Thank you, Alan.
Okay, thank you, Christina. Thank you all of you. I mean, I usually start these by saying for making the journey here and giving up the time, but thank you all for coming from presumably one room in your house to another room in your house to listen to this. It's challenging for everyone to make this as interactive as it really should be, because the other thing I usually start off by saying is that I welcome interruptions, but as Christina has already said in her introduction, please use the chat function as much as possible. I'm sure there are things that I will say that will be unclear, and we want to try to get that sorted out before the end. Let me first of all see if I can share my screen with you. Jesus, it says host disabled attendee screen sharing. So I'm not able to share my screen, Jesus. Are you there, Jesus?
Yes. Are you able to?
I'll try again, but I've got a pop-up box saying host disabled attendee screen sharing.
Okay, it should be.
No, it's I believe. What's this now?
Yes, it should. Try it now.
Just let me have a. And I'm just about to try again.
Yes.
Got it. Okay.
Okay, perfect.
I believe I have. We jump straight in at important slide number 26. Okay. Okay, so as always, I'm going to start off by saying some more general things about Marie Skłodowska-Curie. They may sound like more political points and practical points, which is, of course, what you're all here to learn about today. But for the COFUND program in particular, actually the political points are important when you're writing applications to us, and the evaluators are briefed very, very carefully to see that the sorts of programs you're submitting to us are in fact in line with the political priorities that we have actually published in the work program in the guide for applicants. So I'm going to start with some very general points. First of all, I'll go through the first few slides very, very quickly because it's Horizon 2020. And if you don't know about it now, you only have a few months left to learn about it. But the 80 billion euro research and innovation funding scheme from the European Commission, broken into 3 pillars, in which the Marie Skłodowska-Curie sits in the first pillar, along with the European Research Council, FET, and research infrastructures. One useful thing maybe to say at this point, those of you who have been following the development of Horizon Europe, nothing is set in stone yet, but the Horizon Europe is going to look very similar to this as well, with the pillars and such like. Marie Skłodowska-Curie by itself gives grants to all career stations, all nationalities, and all fields of research. But let me just start off by saying possibly the most important thing I'm going to say for Marie Skłodowska-Curie actions, but also for the COFUND action, is that this is all about the researchers. It's not about the research. The research is important because, of course, without good research, you don't have good researchers. But this is all of so that, for example, they can come into as group leaders or apply for European Research Council. And your proposal really should reflect the researchers with the research in your proposal. So it's about the training, to give them skills and experience, and it's to give them the opportunity of good working conditions and mobility between countries, sectors, and disciplines. And there's a secondary aim of sustainability. We would very much like anything that we fund to turn into something which has sustained itself either by the member states or by private enterprises in those member states. I'm sure everyone knows all of this, but let me just quickly say it, because all of this translates also into the COFUND. We have an entirely bottom-up, with maybe a small exception this year that I'm not going to go into, but we have an entirely bottom-up scheme where you basically propose the research you want to do, and we will propose the research training area you want to work in, and we will accept it based on peer review. So it's open to every area of research and innovation, from basic to close to market research and innovation services. There are no, with very few exceptions, and definitely in COFUND, there are no targeted funding to particular research areas. We encourage the non-academic sector, especially industry and SMEs. It's not a compulsory part of any proposal, but of course, if it is obvious that the non-academic sector and industry would benefit the proposal, then the evaluators will expect to see them in there. As is Marie Curie, mobility is a key requirement. You all, I think, know the mobility rule. We follow the same mobility rules as the ITN and the IF schemes. And we try to avoid putting any conditions at all on the nationality of the fellows. So the mobility depends basically on where the fellow has been working and where they will work. It doesn't depend largely on the fellow's nationality, again, except in some very limited situations. We promote attractive working and employment conditions, attention to gender balance, and we expect the researchers to be publicly engaged. There are annual calls for all of the actions in Marie Curie, with the exception of night. And of course, we're in the last round of calls for this framework program just now. Okay. So, funding for funders. So the idea of COFUND is very, very simple. We would like you to be able to have power to decide what is good for your particular geographical and research environment. Therefore, what we would like you to do is create programs and submit these programs to us for peer review. And if the peer reviewers decide that these programs actually follow the evaluation criteria that we have set out, and they conform to some very limited eligibility conditions, then they'll be eligible for co-funding from us. So you provide part of the funding, and you make a lot of the decisions, and we provide part of the funding, and we put some conditions on what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do in order to be eligible for that funding. So part of the idea at least, is we stimulate regional, national or international programs. Not necessarily programs which already exist. You can actually create new programs and apply for those to be co-funded. And there have been many cases of Spanish organizations doing that, creating entirely new programs and immediately applying for co-funding. And for all stages in the researcher's career, so to use the Commission jargon, early stage researchers, so roughly doctoral level researchers, and experienced researchers, which is everybody later than doctoral researchers, so typically postdoctoral, currently people at any stage in their career. Okay, so and it breaks into two programs, the doctoral program and the fellowship program. And although of course they share quite a lot of features, but we do treat them separately, the doctoral program and the fellowship program. So much of what's on the slide I've already said, just going through the previous ones, but there is some extra thing there. We stimulate the programs. We like to see interdisciplinary research training. We need transnational mobility of researchers, but it would be a positive point in any proposal to also see sectorial transfer mobility of researchers. We allow funding, the funding that comes from you for part of the program. I'll explain this in more depth in 20 minutes or so. But the funding from you that comes from part of the program can actually also come from other European Union funding. So for example, if you have access to structural funds, regional development funds, they can be used as part of your contribution towards a co-fund program. Opportunities for research for all countries is certainly true. And we ask you to comply with the mobility rules of the Marie Skłodowska-Curie Action. So it basically means that if you're running a doctoral program, you have to have the same mobility rules as ITN. And if you're running a fellowship program, the same mobility rule as IF. We do make an exception in the case where you may already be running a program with a mobility rule. You can submit that mobility rule to the evaluators for evaluation, but to be frank with you, in Horizon 2020, I don't think I've seen a single case of somebody doing that, but it is a possibility. The most important line in this slide is the next one: open and transparent recruitment and vacancies widely publicised. And I'll probably come back to this again and again over the next half hour. But here in Brussels, much of our daily work is to deal with this issue of open and transparent recruitment, and to make sure that it is done in an open, transparent, and competitive manner. So this is not like the sort of scheme that many of us have in our own countries, where a PI has a piece of research they need to be done, and they have some funding to employ someone, and they then put an advert out and say, I want someone to come along and work in this particular area. This is more in the spirit of how we here deal with individual fellowships and with ITN. A call will be published, and we expect the people who make a proposal to that call, so to come and work with one of your organisations, especially in the case of the doctoral postdoctoral programs, to propose their own research. And even in the case of the doctoral programs, we need the potential fellows to have a lot of responsibility for what it is they will do, and a lot of choice in what they might do. Expect to see some publishing a list of and can apply to. It has to be a much more open. Obviously this will European Union and at different levels, and it will funding. Just to give you a rough idea of how it works, I think the current number is 42%, but roughly 40% of the funding for the total funding for all the COFUND actions comes from the European Union, European Commission. 60% of the funding comes from the member states, from the organisations in those member states. So what we like to say is these really are your problems, your programs. We are and we are. So let me just skip that one and talk about this begins to work in practice. Okay, so first of all, COFUND, like similar schemes like this we run, is a mono-beneficiary scheme. So there is one single beneficiary, one signatory to the grant agreement, and that both simplifies the procedure, but also puts a lot of responsibility onto the shoulders of the beneficiary, because the beneficiary itself is then responsible for what everybody does. So just to give you an example of how that might be complicated, we could have a beneficiary, for example, the European Respiratory Society in Lausanne could be a beneficiary, but this beneficiary could provide none of the research itself. It actually transfers the funding to laboratories and universities throughout the world. But then that means that beneficiary is responsible then for managing all of these different host partner institutions. And I won't draw back from saying that that can be a difficult procedure and can cause some headaches for the beneficiary. But nonetheless, that's the way it is. It's a mono-beneficiary scheme. Maximum of 10 million euros. This is European contribution per call. And that's per beneficiary, not per project. It's not unknown for a single beneficiary to have more than one COFUND project funded in the same year. Again, this has happened in Spanish organizations. I believe the Barcelona Institute for Science and Technology, for example, recently had 2 projects, a doctoral and a fellowship program. funded in the same year, and the sum of those two programs has to be less than 10 million euros, not just each individual program. The duration of the project is between 3 and 5 years. This is what the grant agreement we signed with you for between 3 to 5 years. But again, some of you may have found that we very strongly push that if you ask for less than 5 years, we kind of encourage you during the grant agreement preparation anyway, just to change it to 5 years to make sure that you have enough time to deal with any, you can still execute the whole thing in 4 years, but we want to make sure you have enough time to deal with any potential problems that occur during the execution of the fellowship without having to ask for grant extensions. And the recruitment, well, that's a slightly gnomic statement there. Recruitment equals your access. What we really mean there is that we insist that you, when you publish a call for fellows, if you're successful in getting co-funding, you use your access as one of your recruitment channels. But then, of course, we also encourage you to use as many other recruitment channels as are appropriate to you. And of course, this may vary different ways from in different senses from discipline to discipline. So the current call, there's a call open just now, last call of Horizon 2020, which is closing on the 29th of September. And the budget from our side for this call is 100 million euros. Now, again, just to put that into some sort of context, this 100 million, those of you who are maybe new to this will be saying, well, people can ask for 10 million. That means that there will be 10 projects funded. In fact, there are some 10 million euro projects funded, although fewer than we used to see before are being submitted. And the typical sizes of projects that are submitted are for fellowship programs are 4 million euros, and for doctoral programs are about 2.5 million euros. It varies from year to year, but that's the ballpark figures. Bear in mind, while I say that, I'm not setting those up as targets. There's absolutely no bias towards that sort of size of a program. And I think I use the same examples almost year after year. But you should aim for exactly the appropriate size of program for you. Don't make it too big, don't make it too small. Make it appropriate for what it is you are trying to do. And in fact, the range of things we have funded, as I say, the largest have been 10 million, the smallest program has been 100,000. So there's a factor of 100 between the smallest and the largest program, and you're free to land anywhere in that in that range. Just do what is best for you. I mean, that's the whole idea of the scheme. So one beneficiary, as I said before, COFUND, excuse me, public and private legal entities established in member states or associated countries, and international European interest organizations. That, in fact, is almost everybody you could think of. There are some organizations which are not eligible. And the obvious example would be a European organization, not an international European interest organization, but a European organization, which, even though it is based in a member state, does not have a legal establishment in that member state. And there are several of those around. The Cancer Institute in Lyon, for example, is physically in France, but it's legally based in Switzerland and as a sub organization of the World Health Organization, and it doesn't have its own legal identity. But you can see from the sorts of example I can give you here that most organizations, if I think that they are capable of providing research training in either doctoral or postdoctoral levels, will be eligible for funding. But please double check with us and double check with Cristina Jesus as well about whether, if you have any questions about your eligibility. Okay, so the budget I mentioned, we break it into two parts. We based basically on the typical size of a doctoral program and the typical size of a fellowship program. So we have ring-fenced 40 million of the 100 for doctoral programs, 60 million of the 100 for fellowship programs. 3 to 5 years, we've said. Actually, again, one of the most important things in this slide is including thing in parenthesis, including the time to take into public calls and to the researchers. Now, if you're successful, we of course cannot stop you. In fact, we might even encourage you to get going with the work that we expect you to do before the grant agreement is signed, because we want you to be as prepared as possible. Although you can only claim costs for fellows if they're employed during the period of the grant agreement. But I think the important thing about that, about the end of that sentence there, about the time to publish the calls, about the time to publish the calls, is that it's a very common problem for beneficiaries to underestimate the amount of time it takes to get the first fellow in through the door. There is an assumption amongst, especially the inexperienced beneficiaries, that they just, when they publish, they say we have the money, and then fellows who are, of course, want work, but fellows will come streaming in, and that's not true. And if you talk to any of your colleagues, if you talk to the NCPs who have been involved in this before, there is a very long lead-in period at the beginning to actually publish the calls, to do a proper recruitment the way we expect recruitment to be done, and then to arrange for the researchers to actually start. And it is not at all unusual for a project not to have first researcher in place in the second year of the project, not in the first year. And that really should be built into your planning right from the beginning. I'm going to say something you all know, but you really need to go back to your scientists and repeat it to them. Good recruitment takes a long time. It's a huge investment in personnel resources to make good recruitment. But if you don't do it, you will regret it, of course, in the future. We have a minimum length for a fellowship, which is 3 months, but that would be a very atypical case. We actually put that in just to stop people trying to maybe use this as something close to a RISE scheme, employing a lot of fellows for a short period of time and using it as a staff exchange scheme. In fact, what we say for the doctoral program is we expect you to offer, and this is very different from ITN, so be careful about this. We expect you to offer funding for the typical length of time it takes a fellow to complete a doctoral program in the country where they're doing the research. So I can't speak for all 40-odd framework program countries. I'm from the United Kingdom myself, and I can tell you that there the typical length of time is 42 months to do the work for a PhD, and we would expect a UK beneficiary to offer 42 months funding to the fellows. So not just 36. 36 might be fine for your circumstances, but in general, look to what is needed for the fellows. For the fellowship program, it depends a little bit on the scientific area. I don't think we have any fellowships which are less than about 10 or 11 months. And those also typically tend to be in arts and humanities, where the fellowship lengths do tend to be much shorter than in sciences. But we have other programs where the fellowships offered are 3 years, and something just appeared around maximum 10 million. Did I do that? Okay, I don't know how that appeared there. There's also a minimum living allowance fixed in the work programme. So this is part of our drive to ensure that the fellows have good working conditions. We say to you that there essentially is a minimum salary that you must pay to the fellows. It's a lower amount for doctoral than for postdoctoral, but minimum salary, so that the fellow, frankly, is you're justified in calling them a Marie Curie fellow because they're getting a decent salary for the work they are doing. It's not fixed at the same level as the Marie Curie salaries in IF and ITN, but it's actually fixed at 70% of that. So there's a minimum living allowance that you have to pay to the fellows. So, still on with the main features. As I've said, we do both doctoral and fellowship programs, but you cannot put in, well, you could do, but we would reject it. A single application has to be either a doctoral application or a fellowship application, but you can submit more than one application. So you can submit in tandem an application for a doctoral program and an application for a fellowship program. You could indeed submit an application for 5 doctoral programs and 15 fellowship programs. But if you're interested in both doctoral and fellowship, you must put in at least 2 applications. And I can maybe just give you a little bit of advice about that, because even if you are attempting in your organization to have some sort of coordination between these 2 programs, it would perhaps be slightly dangerous to link them strongly in the applications. Because of course, if you link them strongly, then if one of them fails, then it might well drag the other one down, because if the doctoral program is poor and the fellowship program is good, but somehow the fellowship program is linked to the doctoral program, then people will be saying, well, it's not going to work if the doctoral program is not also going to be funded. So really try to address them on their own merits. You can, of course, have some cross-fertilization between them, but you must ensure in your application that you write it in such a way that each proposal can be successful on its own without the mutual support of the other, if it's not funded. Same mobility rule I've mentioned before. Importantly, the 4th bullet point here, all fellows, and this is including the doctoral program, must be recruited on a work contract. So unless prohibited by national legislation, and there are a few instances where that occurs, but it is very much the exception rather than the rule. We expect the fellows to be recruited on a work contract. And we are well aware that this gives problems, particularly for doctoral fellows in some of the framework program countries, but nonetheless, that is a rule. A work contract, or I should say, or equivalent contract with appropriate social security benefits, including pension and healthcare. Just to give you a much longer sentence, we expect a work contract to be there, because we think these fellows should be properly supported. They should have a pension. They should have proper health care. They should have sickness care. All sorts of insurance that somebody working in any other context would expect without even thinking about it. Again, different from ITN, or at least different from the major part of ITN, in the doctoral program, all fellows must be registered for a PhD. So it is a doctoral program. It's not a doctoral level training program. It's a training program leading to a doctorate, and all fellows must be registered for a PhD. It doesn't necessarily have to be at the institution where the fellow is doing the work. The fellow could be working in an SME, but they have to get into an arrangement with a degree awarding body. Typically would be a Spanish university, but it could be a Czech university. It could be anywhere that can give a degree. If they're in an arrangement with them that this fellow is in a doctoral program and can be awarded a degree, if they get to the appropriate level, then that's fine for us. I'll just go through over this very quickly, but just to say that we encourage synergies with European structural and investment funds. I have some more things there you can actually read about that. And I will be completely honest with you and say, even though we encourage this, there has not been a lot of success so far. For many different reasons, partly because of the different ways that structural funds are managed compared with Marie Skłodowska-Curie, and also because of the differences in the timescales involved, usually with benefiting from ESIF and benefiting from MSCA. But if anyone wants to talk about that, then please get into conversation with us about it. Okay, so that's, I mean, it's more specific, but it's still relatively general. And at one level, I'm going to stay general because I'm sure all of you have some idea in your head about what a network of organizations offering a COFUND scheme might look like. And I just want you to try to maybe loosen the boundaries of that idea in your head, because there are many, many different ways that this can be done. So I'm going to show you 3 examples, but there are lots of different ways of setting these things up. So here is actually how we thought it was going to work when we first set up COFUND, even though we left it open to other options. And that would be that a research funding organization, for example, the Catalonian government research funding organization, would apply for funding, co-funding for a program they wanted to fund, and then they manage that by having the research training done at various universities and laboratories throughout the region, or throughout the world, in fact. I mean, let's be clear about that. Even though I am today talking to Spanish organizations, there is nothing to stop you, and in fact, we would even encourage you to set up the possibility of something like an individual outgoing fellowship, where the fellow can go to another country, even a third country, and do part of the research or a lot of the research there. We're very open to that. So do what is best for you, but always bear in mind that giving the fellow the opportunity to work outside your region or work outside your country, in the eyes of the evaluators, would be giving the fellow more opportunities. And as I said right at the beginning of this presentation, this is all about fellows and what opportunities they can be afforded. So here's one possible way the whole thing could work. So the research funding organization, whatever it's called, is the beneficiary. We get into the contractual relationship with them. They're responsible for everything. So if Laboratory 10 does something that goes against the rules, then we hold the research funding organization responsible for sorting that out. As I say, that can be it's a responsibility that you should think about as you're getting into this. Okay, so but the research funding organization here is doing none of the actual training itself. Also, a very typical way of setting it up is that one of the training providers, say a particular university in Spain, applies for the COFUND, but then involves other universities and laboratories, potentially again throughout the entire world, to provide parts of this training. So in this case, the University One is kind of playing exactly the same role as the research funding organization in the previous slide, but is also actually doing some of the research training itself. Maybe even a large part of it, much more than the other participants, a larger part of it. So that's one common model here. When we think about the other organizations involved, actually, let me say something slightly different about this slide before I get onto that. This can be politically for University One be a much more difficult situation than would be in the previous slide for the beneficiary, because the people, University 2, Laboratory 1, whatever we call them, see themselves as peer organizations to University 1, and University 1 will be telling them what we are telling University 1 to do. And therefore there is a slightly uneasy hierarchy in this sort of situation, even though it's a very common situation where University One is really taking a lead and really is responsible for the rules that we put into place here. As far as the other organizations are concerned, and I'll come back to this in a little bit later, but as far as the other so I'm just checking the time, but I think give another 15 minutes. As far as other organizations are concerned, when you're making the application, if you're doing something like this, or even if you're doing the previous slide, we need to be sure, the evaluators need to be sure that the program will run as you describe it. Now, that does not necessarily mean that all of the organizations involved need to be known at the proposal stage. It may be, and we have examples of this, that a research funding organization will say, well, we will fund any organization in the world doing high quality research in this area. And that is absolutely fine. But the evaluators need to be convinced that these organizations exist and that these organizations will be willing to actually take part in this scheme. So when putting in the application, you should give as much information as possible about known partners. And if there are potential partners, but at the stage of the application are unknown, you should really justify why you believe that they will be willing to take part and what they will bring to the program, even though they know nothing really about the application that you're putting in. You really have to convince the evaluators that it will run, as you say, it will run. And as I said, I'll come back to this in a minute, but this is actually important when it comes to the financial contributions as well, but I'll talk about that in a few slides' time. More unusually, we have these sorts of, this isn't a structure, this is just a monolithic blob in the middle of the slide. In the very early days of COFUND, we funded quite a lot of co-funding done by single universities, bringing all the fellows into their own institution. Now, there is nothing in that which is against the rules. But given that it has become more and more competitive, then it is less and less likely that a single university just using this as a way of funding their PhD program is going to be successful, because it's giving a limited range of possibilities to the applicants. I'm not saying to you, do not submit something like this. You may have a very good case to make for it. But be aware that that very good case will have to be made exceptionally well in order for you to be successful. So again, to maybe take this by example, if we look at CERN in Geneva, they have in the past, I think they still have at least one running, programs that look a bit like this. But they have a very strong argument to say, well, we are the only organization in the world, a Large Hadron Collider, and therefore people have to come here to do the work that they have to do. That's a much more difficult argument to make for any individual university and laboratory. So this is allowed. You will see programs still running like this, but think very carefully before you do this. Even CERN, at some point in their sequence of applications they made to us, started involving other organizations in other countries in their co-funded programs. So because they saw that this was not looking too good either, but it's possible. And some blended scheme program of the last 3 slides, of course, is possible. Okay, the award criteria, this I really will not go through, but except to say, please read them very carefully, because this is what the evaluators will sit with in front of them. They will have this these 3 criteria and the however many 10 sub-criteria here, and they will look for this in your proposal. And when they look for this in your proposal, please make it easy for them to find it. It's very, when you write these things, especially if they're written by committee, it's very easy to start to mix up how you address each of these sub-criteria. But I really would suggest very, very strongly that you almost structure your proposal as a sub-criterion 1, quality of the selection, sub-criterion 2, quality of the research options. Really focus on that and make it easy for the evaluators to find the answers to, well, these are not questions, but look at the statements you're making that are addressing these issues in the award criteria. You should know these award criteria better than I do by the time you've finished making your application. Okay, so let's just move on to money for a few minutes. What's our contribution? So there are 2 parts to our contribution. The researcher unit cost, so that is essentially the living allowance and mobility allowance. For the doctoral program, the early stage researchers, that's 1,935. And for the postdoctoral program, it's 2,740. And then we've got an institutional cost, which of €325, and that's independent of the program. And that can really be used for, it's sometimes even referred to as management costs. That can be used for anything you need to use it for actually running the program. So this is per person month. So every doctoral fellow which you employ will attract 1,935 plus €325 per month. Okay, so that's our contribution towards this. So how does this look in practice? I apologize for this. This is a very old slide, but it's still working very well, so I'm continuing to use it. But many of you have seen this many times before. So our contribution to living allowance, contracts with full social security, I just described in the last slide. Contribution to management or research networking costs, whatever, 325 I showed in the last slide. What do we say the fellow must actually receive in terms of remuneration? So for the total of their living allowance and mobility allowance, and it's up to you actually how you divide this into living allowance and mobility allowance. Most people, of course, it's a relatively large proportion of it is the salary, the living allowance, and a smaller part is the mobility allowance, but there is no restriction on that. And sometimes this has tax implications, so it depends on what tax regime you're actually sitting in. But basically, the thing there in the 3rd bullet point is the money which is going directly towards the fellow. So in the doctoral program, it's €2,709, and in the fellowship program, €3,836. Now that includes social costs, and not just the fellow's social costs, but also the institution's social costs, their contribution towards social security, pensions, and such like. And saying that, please be very careful if you are a successful co-funded program, not to advertise that number there as the fellow's salary, because that may actually include money you are giving to the Spanish government. But please advertise a salary as you would do if you're employing any other person. They expect to pay tax on their salary, but they don't expect to pay the institution's tax on their salary as well. So those are the minimum amounts you have to pay. You will notice very quickly that they are both larger than the numbers in the first bullet point. So you must, part of your contribution is going towards paying the fellow. But of course, there'll be other parts to your contribution which are to do with travel allowances, to do with research costs, all sorts of different things that are necessary in order to run a program well. You may be running a program that requires a lot of knockout mice, for example, and that may require a lot of input from your side. You may be running a program where the fellow is in a library for 3 years, and that requires a minimum amount from your side. We give the same amount, and we expect the same minimum amount to be paid to the fellow in both cases. So check very carefully what your contribution is going to be in order for the program to run well. And basically, this is what one of the big things that the evaluators are going to be looking for. Are you putting in enough funding from your side in order for this to be a successful program? And it's important for you to think about that when you actually do the proposal. So I pressed the wrong button there. Here we go. So here's a typical table. So you might break your cost items down into the column on the left-hand side. And what's happening there in the two other columns, the middle column is what you're actually spending. So these are examples because it will vary from program to program. And the right-hand column is what we are contributing there, okay? So you make the application to us and you tell us these numbers in the middle column. We are going to have a living allowance of 4,800 euros per month. We're giving the fellow research costs of 500 euros. I mean, just let me pause there to say, you're giving us the typical numbers. There is no restriction on you to say you're paying every fellow exactly the same, as long as you pay them all above the minimum. And there is no restriction that you must give each fellow exactly the same research cost. You can choose to do it on the basis of the research the fellow is actually following. But you're saying, on average, over the program, the research costs are 500 euros per month per fellow, and the other costs of those. You're saying to us, basically, it's going to cost us 7,000 euros per month to fund the program for each fellow that we employ. We send this out for evaluation. If it's positively evaluated, there is our contribution on the right-hand side. So we would make a contribution in total of just over 3,000 euros towards that. So in this example, it turns out to be about 40% of the total costs, even though we're only contributing to 2 cost categories. And it turns out that that's actually quite typical. But I can give you the range. There are some programs, very expensive programs, where we are only paying about 15% of the total costs. And there are some very inexpensive programs where we are paying close to 70% of the total cost, because all the research costs are low, the salary is low and such like. But again, bear in mind the evaluators will look at this. If the salary is low, will they consider it a good program for the fellows? If the research costs are low, will the evaluators consider that the fellows can actually carry out the research properly? So the examples exist. Again, there is no target for you to aim to. You do what is appropriate for the program that you are trying to run, but this is a typical example. So just to check something there, if we add the living allowance and mobility allowance, it certainly comes to more than 3,836 euros. So that's fine. You've satisfied that criterion there. And the other cost items can be funded. So mobility allowance, research costs, things that we don't give you money towards. The mobility allowance, research costs, and indirect costs can be funded from other European Union resources, including structural funds. Not Horizon 2020, but other European Union resources. Okay, so I simplify it there. You can read that later on. And also make this point, but again, I don't want to get into that. If anyone wants to come back and talk later, we can. And okay, so what makes a COFUND project successful? Interdisciplinary and circular international dimension, a solid co-funding mechanism, and wide and diversified network. Okay, and impact individual and institutional level. I am just going to pause for 1 minute and I will be back. Just hang on. Fiona, people can hear you shouting. People can hear you. Okay, apologies for that. Just a domestic thing. So, so interdisciplinary, intersectoral, and international dimension. So this is really to do with the offer for the fellows. What makes it an attractive program for them and a supportive program for them to come and work on? A solid co-funding mechanism. So we have to be sure that the co-funding actually exists and is substantial. Now, I mentioned this a little bit in an earlier slide. There are many cases where, even though it's a mono-beneficiary program, the partner organizations, the ones which are doing the training, are actually providing some of the funding. Now, because it's mono-beneficiary, we need to be ensured, we need to know that this funding will actually appear. And so what actually we say in the application is that if you as a beneficiary apply for a co-funded program, and you're saying that some of the co-funding is going to come from one of your partners, we actually need a letter of commitment outlining the size of that co-funding, written essentially in a reasonably legal sense and headed notepaper and signed by someone who can actually sign these things, to ensure to us that this money will actually appear at the appropriate point during the execution of the project. If you are unable to provide a letter like that, we instruct evaluators to ignore that financial contribution to the program and evaluate it as if it's not going to be there and decide on that basis whether or not it's going to work. So we really need this letter of commitment from partner organizations, even though there's not an illegal organization with this, a legal relationship with this. Okay. So, high quality peer reviewed selection processes. The selection process really is the key to everything, and I can't emphasize that enough. And it's here in Brussels, it's what gives us problems from day to day, where people find the need to cut corners in their selection processes. And if you, without trying to sound too heavy about this, if you propose a selection process which is accepted, then you don't follow that selection process, we will not accept the cost for the fellows who are employed. They have to be, you have to follow the selection process, which is in your grant agreement. Proposals involving a large network, yes, of course, because we give more choice to the researcher. And we have a recurrent issue of transparency and fairness of selection processes. So they really have to be transparent. It can't be, I mean, I'm going right to the end of the spectrum here to make a point, but you know, this happened, or at least it happened in my day, that you meet someone you like at a conference and you offer them a job. I mean, that just cannot happen here. It must be done in an open and transparent way, and you will be reporting to us on the selection process after you carry it out. Okay, so just to give you actually good news, I think, in most of these cases, because our attitude to COFUND has right from the beginning been you're putting a substantial amount of your money into this, and therefore we have confidence that you're not going to put forward a proposal which is complete nonsense, because then if you do that, you're going to have to implement it. And therefore we tend to see very high quality proposals, and relative to the other Marie Curie schemes, we therefore have a budget which can fund quite a high success rate in both the doctoral and the fellowship programs. So just over the last 4 years, to give you some ideas of the success rates, we saw this. The budget hadn't changed enormously over the last few years, and basically, I mean, we saw some interesting things happening, and which we still have no answers for. In 2017, people decided to put in a lot of doctoral applications, which each were high value, and therefore we could fund fewer of them. But then in 2018, we went back to what was more normal, and nobody knows why that happened exactly. But what you can see is, in general, a high success rate there. So it's definitely not like ITN, and it's certainly better than also than individual fellowships. Individual fellowships, again, not quite so high, but still high success rate. I mean, over 20% last year. It's been even higher than that in the past. So it's not, it's a lot of work, but the rewards are there, and it's certainly not a gamble in the way that some applications can be. Average proposal costs, I mean, I've talked about this a bit, and actually you see this 2017 effect where the average proposal costs jumped up and then went back down again. But again, this is just for your information. This is not a target to aim at. And if we just look at the distribution of proposals last year, let me first of all, before I go into this, and say Spain has been traditionally, if we can talk about 14 years being a tradition, Spain has traditionally been very successful in co-funding. And has run very many good programs. And I mean, my personal, apart from the obvious level, the quality of the proposals and the quality of the work that's going on, I think it's also a little bit related to the fact that the regional structure and your regions can be a little bit more nimble and respond to things more in a more agile way than most large countries. Having said that, last year in the doctoral program, France got 12 proposals funded, Spain 8, which is very good, but it has done better, I believe, and a number of proposals submitted, sorry. So the successful proposals, France got 4 funded and Spain got 3 funded, and then everywhere else that was funded only got 1. So I mean, that's very good success compared to the other countries. Fellowship program, you submitted a large number of proposals, but we kind of see the same pattern here. Some countries swapping around, and again, France got 4 funded, and last year, and I mean, I've had conversations with some of you about this already. Last year, Spain was not so successful in the fellowship program. That I think Christina would agree, was a very unusual year last year for Spain. And it may just be an outlier, it may be some noise in the system. I'm not quite sure, but I don't want you to feel discouraged from looking at that slide there. So just the normal links before I finish, and again, sorry for taking over time. Link to Marie Curie Action's website, link to Horizon 2020, and to actually the funding and tenders portal, as it is now called, not the participant portal. And thank you again very much for that. That's my email. Do not hesitate to email. I will answer or pass it on to someone else to answer. I may not answer in minutes, but you will get the answer. So thank you in these difficult situations. I think it's quite tiring. I was in some training a couple of days earlier this week, and trying to pay attention to these online talks is very difficult. So thank you for bearing with me to the end. And I'm looking forward now to hearing Bodan and Julie tell you more about their particular schemes.
Thank you very much, Helen, for your presentation. Very exhaustive and comprehensive. So thank you very much. We got a couple of questions. I think we can have around 5 minutes, if that's okay with you.
Yeah.
I got a couple of questions here. One is related to the structural funds. That will be the second one, because they would like you to develop maybe a little bit further if you really think how can that be done, because you've mentioned that indeed it's something that is there but it hasn't been used so far, so maybe why it hasn't been used. And we have one specific question that I will now tell you. It says it's a Spanish funding organization, and they also have in the COFUND project partner organization that will host the fellows. So they are preparing a COFUND fellowship program. All candidates that fulfill the eligibility may submit an application without any kind of pre-selection. Among the application requirements, they want to include a letter of acceptance from the host organization stating its willingness to accept the candidate to pursue the research project presented in the application. I'm not quite sure when I'm asking the question when at that stage is the application, is this letter of acceptance going to be sent, but they're asking us if this approach is correct.
Okay, so I'll give you the one-word answer and then I'll talk for 10 minutes, if that's okay, Christina. Sure. Yes, but. So I'm sure many of you know this particular issue here. It's the issue that we call shorthand pre-selection. And you have to be very careful when you write the proposal to describe what is happening here. And partly because when it comes to the evaluation procedure that will take place at the end of this year, I will be standing in front of the evaluators before they start, telling them to look at this potential issue of pre-selection very strongly, and I will be saying it again and again and again. And so let me describe the problem and then the potential solution to the problem. The problem is that we, as I said in the presentation, we insist on open, transparent, competitive selection procedure. Some organizations, and I'm very happy to say actually in this forum, I don't believe any funded Spanish organizations actually did this, but some organizations tried to get around this by saying, okay, we will have an open and transparent procedure, but essentially only for people we decide to allow through to that procedure. So the organization making the beneficiary organization was looking at the applications. It was choosing a subset of those applications to go through for evaluation and ignoring the rest. Or it was essentially doing its own evaluation first and passing information on with the fellows to the independent evaluators, giving their opinion. So this is a very tricky situation and difficult to deal with, because of course we don't want to insist that a laboratory takes someone who they really, for good reasons, do not want to take. But we want also to avoid them just making their own selections. And as I have actually seen, then putting 10 people forward for 10 posts for international peer review, and somehow magically these 10 people getting the post. So, of course they need to be involved. They are appropriately involved because the laboratories, the beneficiaries, whatever, they're all sitting as part, but not the entirety, of the evaluation committee. So they have the right there to put forward their opinions, but they also have the obligation to allow their opinions to be challenged by anybody else on the committee, including the people who are reviewing this from independent organisations. Now. I seem to be getting further away from answering your question, Christine.
No, but I think...
No, I'm getting there. The issue is this, the practical issue is this. We allow laboratories, organisations, I think I'm looking at the question now, it talks about a letter of acceptance, stating its willingness, okay.
Yes.
We allow laboratories to put a letter like that forward, but not based on their academic judgment of the quality of the applicant or even the quality of the research programme. The letter of acceptance and its willingness to accept the candidate should be limited to saying, yes, this is the kind of research we can support in our laboratory, because this is the kind of research we can do. So to use an example I often use, if somebody applies to a life sciences laboratory to do a PhD in Russian literature, then we would expect the laboratory to put a letter forward saying, we cannot accept this person because we do not have the facilities to support this person. But if they have the facilities to support this person, the letter should be limited to saying that. And it should say the same thing or a very similar thing for each person who wants to go to that laboratory. It's only if there is absolutely no way the work can be done in that laboratory or in that situation that the laboratory should be saying no. Now, having said that, I mean, I'm going to put in a small coda here, because actually it has never happened. If at the end of the day, the laboratory comes to us and says, we absolutely cannot, this person has come top of the ranking list, but we're not going to take them for this reason or that reason or this reason, we will listen to that and we will discuss it with them. But in fact, it has never happened. And the reason it's never happened is it's easy for someone to reject someone early in the process for all sorts of spurious reasons. Whereas if somebody gets a high ranking in a ranking list, it's very difficult for the organisation then to turn around and justify why they're not taking that person. But that's the point at which we would expect the justification to come, not at the beginning of the process, but at the end. And as I say, when we insist on that, we have never actually seen it. We have never seen a laboratory refuse to take somebody who has been evaluated highly.
My macro was muted, sorry. Thank you very much for elaborating on the answer. And I think you're giving a lot of good tips here. So we got another 2 questions, but I'm just gonna relate to one, and I will be answering myself the one related to the structural funds, because obviously I think I can elaborate on that one. There was a specific one mentioning in the case of institutions from different countries involved, is it okay if the salaries are different because they are different countries, always respecting the minimum established by the Commission? Is that okay?
Yeah, it's okay even for the salary to be different in the same country, depending on the level of the fellow or the institution or the city that they happen to be working in. And it's certainly the case that the salary can be different in different countries. We have several programs running like that, but as you say yourself, Christina, always respecting the minimum. Let me, I mean, I say emphasize, but actually I didn't say this, so let me say something. Correction coefficients play no part in this at all, and therefore that minimum salary is just an absolute number. And if that person is working in in some small African country, for example, that minimum salary still applies, even though it might be considerably higher than the local level of salary. There is no correction to that. And we actually have had, I'm actually slightly quoting here a particular case we have with an organization in Switzerland, I believe it is, who has partners in North Africa, and this has caused a problem, but nonetheless, those are the rules. But I mean, to take framework program countries, if you're sending someone to Moldova, the minimum salary is the same as if you're sending someone to Denmark. And just also bear in mind, I mean, there's always something in the back of people's mind when they ask this question, that if you are sending someone to Denmark, it may be that the evaluators will consider that you should be paying them a higher salary than you would be in Spain, and it's not a good program if you're not doing that. So that's one thing to be taken into account. So it's not just about lowering the salaries, it's also about raising the salaries.
Sounds reasonable. Okay. So we just have the one related to structural funds that I will myself answer in the chat. So thank you, Alan, and I think you're staying with us for a while now. So Jesus, well, not Jesus, sorry, Bogdan, I think we'll leave the floor to you, if this is okay. Bogdan, who actually wrote the proposal for the Universidad Rovira i Virgili, will explain us a little bit how he did it. Thank you very much.
Okay,
Gracias,
thank you.
Bogdan.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for inviting me and giving us the opportunity to tell you a little bit about what we did. My name is Bogdan Nae. I'm currently a pre-award officer at USPIR, which is our award office at the University Rovira i Virgili. I was lucky enough in 2015 to write the first COFUND proposal for doctoral programs that we won, thankfully. Then I did a couple of years managing this program, and now last year I went back to writings, and fortunately we were able to win again. And actually it was signed, I think the grant agreement was signed a couple of days ago, so we are very happy about it. So I'm structuring my presentation a little bit on what is actually required, what we found we needed to do in order first to make a successful proposal, and then to actually have a successful program that allowed us to win another a continuation of this program. It won't be maybe that much focused on the writing itself. I think Julian will do a better job with that. But to give you an idea of a big program, it's a 50 PhD students in each program, so a total of 100 students. Maybe we'll give you some pointers on what you need to do in your proposal to be successful. So first, a bit of background on what happened in our case. Alan already explained that you can design a whole new program for the first time, or you can actually try to improve an existing one. So this is what we did at URV. Before 2012, there was no structured program, PhD program at URV, structured fellowship programs. Each professor gave their own PhD positions, but in 2012, URV created what is called the Martí Franquès program for PhD fellows. It has 2 editions each year and about 40 paid contracts. And to get on top of this, in 2008, URV endorsed the Charter and Code, and we were awarded the logo in 2014. So this combination of factors allowed us in 2015 to actually win this proposal, in my opinion. So our motivation to write the first MFP COFUND, we wanted to attract excellent researchers to embark here at URV on their research career. We also, in line with the Charter and Code, we wanted to improve the working and employment conditions for our PhD fellows. We started also in these years, in 2014, to develop a new training plan for transferable skills plan for our fellows, and we wanted to bring it to a very high level. Also, with the start of H 2020, where open access has become very important, we wanted to create a culture of openness of the research. So we wanted to disseminate heavily in open access. We wanted to participate in open data pilot, and this allows us to do this. And also internally, as an institution, we wanted to prove our commitment to the Charter and Code and to their requisites. So, in order to do all this, for talent attraction, we, as an institutional objective that the whole university was pulling towards, was to create an extensive dissemination campaign to attract all the best, to try to attract the best candidates around the world to URV. We wanted to reinforce institutional relationship with all our partner organizations. We had, if I'm not mistaken, around 30 partner organizations in the first COFUND. For working and employment conditions, we wanted to offer the best salaries at PhD level in Southern Catalonia, with the exception of ITNs. This is by far the best salaries that they can get. We also offered each fellow research costs, about 7,500 euros per year, for expenses related to their research project, including secondments, including conference participations, including publication in open access, and everything that's related to their project. We wanted to collaborate with non-academic partners. We had several non-academics that were partner organizations in our proposal. About the innovative training plan, our COFUND states mandatory secondments for our fellows at partner organizations for a minimum of 3 months in order for them to receive what in Spain is called international recognition of their PhD. They have and had non-academic mentors from our partner organizations and from other partners that we got after winning the project as well, from extending our relationships with them. We were offering, of course, hands-on research training in our labs. And we developed a transferable skills training program of at least 30 hours. But we actually had about, initially, I think about 300 hours of courses and workshops that we developed within the Martí Franquès program, the COFUND program. So they had access to all this training. So, of course, the grant agreement with the European Commission states that it's mandatory publication and open access. So we wanted actually to do this. We are publishing in repositories, and we are putting data for people to benefit. But the most important, probably, aspect of the entire project is the design of the full transparent and merit-based selection process that has to be in line with the Charter and Code. So for this, we have made we have committed a lot of resources in order to be able to provide this. We developed a paper-free application. Previously, everything had to be handed in paper and signed and everything. We created a remote evaluation. So we did a remote evaluation by external experts with 3 experts per each applicant. We created evaluation and selection criteria that were merit-based and were published for all the candidates to know. So all these objectives were set in the proposal, in the first one, and they were key to actually winning the proposal. So when we actually got the project, the first thing we started to disseminate the call. I have to underline that, like Alan said, we needed time before the actual start of the project. We needed about 4 months to actually develop all the software and develop all the strategy for dissemination and to join all the units at our university to actually make the first call. And then the call itself was about 5 months to select the candidates. And I think the first contract for about 1 year after we started the entire process. And that those were the European candidates that had no problem coming to URV. The others that came from outside of Europe, it was about 14 to 15 months to actually come to URV and be employed and start working there. So we did a lot of dissemination of our calls in national press, in the networks of contacts of our university. We had two of the positions were reserved for candidates with disabilities, and nobody else could actually apply for those, only if they had a proven disability. So then we made extensive dissemination for these projects in networks, in like ONCE and I think in Denmark and several other networks that deal with disabled people around Europe to actually be able to attract candidates. We also published to Spanish embassies around the world in countries that were of special interest for candidates. Of course, social networks everywhere, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook. We put a video on YouTube. And of course, on the jobs portal like Our Access, Find a PhD or Nature Jobs. We did whatever we could to try to get the maximum number of candidates. So what we had two calls, each of them for 25 students, basically. In 2017, it was the first call, and we received a total of 329 applicants. Out of those, 227 were eligible. So the other ones, to various reasons like ESR or mobility rules, they were not eligible to participate. Next year, in 2018, we had 669 total applicants. Out of them, 484 were eligible. So we did a lot of pre-screening. It was a lot of work to actually check all the eligibility, and then a lot of work to evaluate all these people. The ratio of men to women, unfortunately, was not as great as we would have wanted, and this is one point that we want to improve with the next COFUND. At the end of so we had this is more or less the distribution by continent of all our eligible applicants, all of our applications. We had a lot from India, we had a lot from Africa, and we had a lot of candidates from South America. This is a small graph of the 2017 call to give you an idea on where this came from. So we had 62 countries represented. In 2018, we had 82 countries represented, with a lot of people from Pakistan and Iran and Italy, fortunately. It's nice. Then we did a 6-step process ourselves. So we started with a call announcement. Then for 2 months, the online application form was open for everybody to apply. We did an eligibility check with a redress for them to fix any issues that they have with the eligibility. That was about 2 weeks. Then we had 1 month for expert evaluations, for remote expert evaluations. We had 1 month for interviews, and we invited the best candidates for at least the top 3 from each position. They were invited for interviews, but in many cases they invited everybody. And then as a last step, about 5 months after the start of the project of the call, we had our winners. So what did the management team? So first of all, the first thing we did, we hired a project manager for a project of this size, of 50 students. We needed a dedicated management team, and with everything that we have planned, including the dissemination of results, we have also hired a communication manager. So what we did was first to develop a dedicated website for the COFUND project. We created a new portal for application submission. Everything was done online and registered online. We developed a new online evaluation tool for experts, which is following basically the criteria for that the European Commission sets for evaluations. So we streamlined a lot of bureaucratic processes within our universities, in processes regarding human resources, the doctoral school, PhD programs, and then we made basically the management team was formed by several people from a lot of services that provided support to all the candidates. The evaluation process is probably, between selection and evaluation, they are the most important for COFUND. So we needed to design a good and fair evaluation process. So we had 3 experts for each curriculum. We didn't have a consensus panel, so all evaluations received their score and an average score. We already defined all the evaluation criteria previous to the grant. It was open and public for all the candidates to know what they should be expecting to be evaluated for. And this evaluation counted as 50% of the final score. We created evaluation guides for all the evaluators, explaining and giving them the exact forms that they will have to fill. So for the first call, we had enough experts, but with URV contacts. And then for 2018, due to almost doubling the number of candidates, we went to our access and we found a bit more experts. We randomly appointed the experts to research discipline they have chosen, and they were evaluated on the basis of their curriculum that they fit with a certain discipline, and they did the entire evaluation online. We paid our evaluators. They were paid about €41 per each CV they have evaluated, and we paid almost €100,000 in total for both calls, which is quite a lot. By gender, here we did manage to get parity between men and women, and by location, majority of our evaluators came from outside of Spain in both calls. So after the evaluation phase, there was the final selection, which included the interview phase. So we created one selection committee for each position. We conducted interviews via Skype with at least, as I mentioned, the top 3 candidates, but often there were more than that. The interview criteria was also public for all candidates to know what to expect. And the final scoring, it was 50% from the scores of the evaluators and 50% from the interviews themselves. And whatever the scores gave at the end, that was the winner of the grant. We had, of course, reserve lists, the winner and the reserve list in case they don't accept the fellowship, which happened. We can go to the next one. So after they win the position, what kind of support did they receive from our university? They receive support with pre-registration in the PhD program. It is the law here in Spain that if you are not pre-registered in a PhD program, you cannot receive a contract. So we first pre-registered everyone, then the HR department helped everyone with the residence permit and with the visa procedures. The international center that deals with most of the mobility at the university helped with finding accommodation and with the NIA procedures, which is the national identity for foreigners, which is a local procedure. Then the doctoral school again helped with the enrollment in the PhD program after they started their contract. And all the other administrative details or whatever they required about the fellowship, it was done by the management team. Also, all the dissemination and the communication and outreach that they will do throughout their fellowship was done. It's a joint effort between the management team, the library services, and the communication services at the university. Also, we developed a new transferable skills training program, which the Institute of Education Science, which is managing this program, together with the management team and with the doctoral school, they put together this nice program. So basically, again, in the proposal written, our communication and dissemination of results, which includes basically a plan of exploitation and dissemination of results. And with these targets, where we include EU platforms lately, I will tell you a bit about this. Researchers Night, a lot of activities here in Tarragona organized by the university. So these are some of the results. Due to the COVID now, and due to climate change in the last couple of years, we had our COFUND represented in Horizon Results Platform, which is a very high accomplishment for us. For the COVID, for example, we had 2 of our COFUND fellows and their supervisors that work right now on these COVID issues. They are represented in Horizon Results. We had Special Fellow of the Week, one of the guys that works on COVID, and we are doing Fellow of the Week campaigns for all of our fellows. We are, I think, retweeted by the European Commission itself, and we are followed, and we are there. So about the transferable skills training, before the COFUND project, the first one, our Institute of Education Science were offering about 21 transferable skills courses at PhD level. With the COFUND, we used the management funds to introduce 23 new courses, all of them in English, as a pilot training plan. And the idea is that next year, all these courses that have been finished now will be introduced in the normal rotation, and they will be introduced for all of the PhD students and assumed by the Institute of Education Sciences. So we are using, for us, this is the most important, we are using funds from the European Commission in this program to actually improve our services and our offer for all the PhD students at the university. We are also running each year a Train the Trainers course for all the PhD supervisors, and most of the COFUND supervisors have already made this course, and is open also for our fellows. It is a course that is recognized by the European University Association, and this course is very important for us because it provides the best opportunity for the supervisors. I mean, they learn how to be better supervisors, and then the fellows have the best opportunity for supervision available. So what I think were the key factors for a successful grant, for a successful first grant. For proposal writing, it was the institutional support and commitment at the highest levels. The rector and the vice rector and all the heads of services, they bet on this COFUND project. They wanted this to be successful, and they wanted to use the money to implement changes at the university level, at PhD level. So also what was important, I think the HR logo helped us a lot, because we already committed with the charter and code recommendation in all the processes of all selection, evaluation processes, and hiring, working conditions, everything. You have to know your institution well. For us, this is a very big project. We are a university that offers all the areas of research. So you have to know, to know your institution well. It's not enough to have research, a good level of research. You have to provide other support to the fellow, other facilities, other services like sports, music, any leisure activities that can be provided. So you have to know them all, and you have to write them in the proposal to offer a package to the fellow to come to your university. Also, ask for help. This proposal, it's a big proposal, and you need help from people that know things better than you do. The doctoral school for me was very important to explain all the procedures that are required and are involved in the selection and evaluation of fellows. HR will define all the rules for employment, and to see whatever rules you need to put with a national legislation to put forward in order to be able to employ people afterwards. For project implementation, my advice is to hire a very good project manager to deal with the running of this project. And It's very, very important. For a big project like ours, I advise to hire a communications manager, because there will be a lot of results and there will be a lot of opportunities for outreach, and they have to be managed by a dedicated person. Also, it's all about the fellows, so give them all the support you can offer. What we started to do, and it was very good, and we are doing this now regularly, is meetings with the fellows and the supervisors. You can have a lot of feedback on how the program is running and what their problems are and what you can improve. And then accompany the fellows in every step of the way. As a project manager, I had thousands of emails from the fellows, and they need this. They need to know that they can contact someone. They have a key person to contact it for anything. We found that, at least in the beginning, open access in itself was a very difficult topic to get right. So they needed a lot of help with this. So what about our new proposal that we have just been granted? For us, it was about continuing what we did well in the first program and try to improve on it. A couple of years ago, the template stated that in case of, if you want to make a new proposal that builds on the previous one, you had to make a comparison and stress what is new and what are the proposed improvements. This, in 2019, this wasn't part of the template, but we thought that it's a good idea to actually put on paper what we did successfully and what we plan to do next in order to make it even better. So we maintain the good parts from the previous program, and then we improve the weak points that we have found during all these years of experience with the program. Again, fellows are the protagonists, including at the proposal level. Everything that you put in the proposal needs to improve their experience at this institution, at your institution. Also, if you already have a management team and you repeat the grant, keep them happy, because the last thing you want is to start all the process of hiring a manager when you already have a good one that knows exactly what to do. So what does it mean to have these two projects at URV? We are a small institution. We are very young. We are about 27 years old, I think. So for us, it was very important to get this grant. So for us, it's about inclusion and diversity and talent. So we wanted to attract excellent PhD candidates to our institutions, and we think we have accomplished that with the first one. We wanted them to come from everywhere, and we wanted to infuse the territory with fresh ideas that allow us to grow here in the province of Tarragona. For visibility, URV is among the best funded institution in the doctoral program to date. So we are very happy about it. We have been lately featured on Horizon's results platform. I think in Spain, on the next one, on the Marie Curie actions that we research COVID and SARS. To date, I think we are one of the two mentioned institutions. So it's a very good advertisement for us. What also means we have the opportunity to collaborate now with a wide range of international institutions. Between the two programs, I think we have about, if I'm not mistaken, almost 100 partner organizations that want to work with us. So we have a lot of room to do the mandatory secondments. We want to do co-tutels with them. We want to co-supervise doctoral thesis with our partners. So it's a very good opportunity for us to improve our networking as an institution and to improve our visibility. In the second grant, we had about over 20 non-academic institutions that are offering support, many of them from the territory. So we want to have a very strong, with a new one, with a strong non-academic involvement in the program via mentoring and via opportunities to work or to do common things with these non-academics. And for the institution itself, we had the opportunity to change and improve internal processes. Several things that we have done with the first COFUND are now being implemented in other programs as well. So we reuse the applications that we have developed. We are starting to extend the dissemination campaigns to other areas of the university. So we are using the COFUND funds to improve things in other areas of the university. And most of all, we are joining together teams that previously didn't work before, and now they are working on a common goal to manage this grant. So thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for listening. I hope I wasn't too boring. And I want to thank the team members for both projects. I want to thank particularly the project manager, Juana Moldovan, and Paloma Ponton, which is the communication manager for these two projects. So any questions that you have after the session, maybe later in the day or in the next days, Christina can forward them to me, and I would either answer them or put you in contact with the project manager if they can provide a better answer. So thank you very much for everything.
Thank you, Bogdan. Wait a minute, I will try to initiate the video. There are one question. I think we have time for one question. There is one question for you. I don't know if you check the chat. Is from Eva Martin. If I have understood,
Yes.
a selection committee was set up for each position with different experts, each one instead of one unique selection committee. Why was it decided so? I don't know if you have any an answer for this.
Yes. Well, basically, we are offering several areas of research. We have offered, I think, about 25. We offer the 25 research projects that cover about 8 or 9 PhD programs. So we needed to set up for each position, basically that has its own particularity. We set up a selection committee formed of people that are working in those areas in order to better understand the candidates and to better select them. It didn't make sense for us to do social science and have engineers or chemists doing the selection process. So this was the main issue. For each position, we made one selection committee that is made up of specialists in that area. So yeah, how do you organize the overall management of this from the selection to the implementation of the program? I'm not exactly sure what you mean by this, so maybe after or by email I can give you much better information about this. So then, concerning can I do one more or?
Yes, there is another from Christina.
Yeah.
You can see the comparison between your proposals.
Yeah. Since it didn't have a specific in the template, a specific part in the template, I decided to put this kind of conclusions on what we are providing compared to the next one at the end of each section. So at the end of the excellence, it was about the selection process and everything. If we have improvements, at the end of impact was about the dissemination and about working with other institutions. And at the end of the implementation, it was about all the processes that we proposed to improve in the new project compared to the old one. So it was like a green box of several lines that compared the two proposals after each section.
Okay. Thank you so much, Bogdan, for your presentation. It was really interesting, and I think it will be very helpful for all the applicants. And now we will pass the floor to the last speaker, Julian Sauer. Is going to present practical tips on how to write and manage projects. He's a very experienced consultant and manager and former NCP from Switzerland, and we are really happy to have you here, Julian. So the floor is yours, and thank you for being with us.
Thanks a lot for inviting me. It's my pleasure. So many people. Very good. And I think all of you have a very high level of experience already. So I hope I can share with you anything that might be useful for you. Here's my presentation coming up. Just a second. So there you go. I would like to share with you a couple of things that came to my attention when I help people write a good proposal, and also out of the perspective of somebody who actually runs a proposal right now, but I will get to the different features. So you can see here, my outline is I will go through the different evaluation criteria. You can see that the blue one about excellence is the biggest one, because I found, of course, you have to write a very good impact and implementation section. But if excellence is not really, really excellent, the other parts won't help it anymore. So let's have a longer look at this part. And then I will also say and share a couple of tips about impact and implementation. Preliminary thoughts, I think we discussed that now, is of course things like, do you want to set up a fellowship or a doctoral program? Which kind of mobility scheme, maybe a combination? With or without partner organization, we said, I don't think it makes sense these days to set up a whole COFUND without the significant contribution of partner organizations. Whether that is with or without finances is up to you and your setup. Try to have a very high international involvement, if possible, also with regards to the partner organizations. Make up your mind and define the number of calls you're going to have, the number of positions, the duration of the fellowships, and the timeline. Bogdan already mentioned it. When do you want your project to start? That is not exactly the same day as you want to open your first call. However, I have witnessed it twice now successfully, that a call would open 1 month after the actual start of the project. That does mean, however, you're going to be in a huge, well, depends on you if that stresses you or not. I can tell you this was the case for the EMPA Postdocs 2 program, which I'm running now. It requires a lot of preparation and preparatory work before the start of the project. You cannot yet have finances by the European Commission for this work. So you can do that, you can have an ambitious start, and then you have to pre-finance the preparatory work. And of course, as we just said, are you going to have a new program, or is it an existing program? Or is it maybe a continuation of a COFUND? On that note, I once had to write a proposal that was a continuation, and they put the comparison between the running program and the new program under section 2. Apparently that worked as well, but what Bogdan just said for the writing, put it for each evaluation criteria, sounds very good as well. Right, so let's have a look at the excellence 1.1. This part here is right out of the guide for applicants, and it's a selection and recruitment process. And actually the guide for applicants gives you a lot of information already. How you're going to disseminate the information of the calls, which kind of information do you give, and eligibility criteria, other application requirements, any other relevant point. Be precise. Be precise as much, give as many details as you can. And my first tip would be, as one of the first deliverables, have a strategy ready for the dissemination and communication of the program and its calls, and have that really as a dedicated deliverable. And then say who's setting it up. Maybe a media office and the project management team should help, and what is in there. And in most cases, I think nowadays the website serves as an anchor, of course. Combine this here and also write, we are going to have sort of an internal and external kickoff meeting, because I can only underline and second what Bogdan just said. You're going to need to have a stellar internal team, and everybody in the institution that is the beneficiary and also the partner institutions, they need to know what's going on. You are very excited because you've got this huge grant, but that doesn't mean that everybody at your partner organization is also, you know, that they're really aware of what that means. So communicate well internally within your project, within your institution and the other institutions who take part. And you can also already now, if you want to, and if you think that makes sense, have a sort of launch event where you publicize, this is our new project, this is what it's going to mean. Be precise also, who do you want to reach? Not necessarily for these events that I just spoke about, but for the dissemination of the call. Who are your target audience? Who do you want to attract? For example, experienced researchers of the best 10% in particular fields. It could be you are setting up a co-fund that is not focused on particular fields, but covers everything because your university covers every potential research area. For example, in the field of EMPA, that is the Institute of Material Sciences, it didn't make sense, of course, to try to attract social scientists. So we specified, okay, it's going to be interesting for chemists, for material scientists, for physicists, for engineers, and so on. Not exclusively. Everybody is allowed to apply, but of course, these are our target audience. And you can also mention the mobility rule already now. I brought here a best practice example of what such a strategy for dissemination can look like. This is open access. It's not from a COFUND, it's from an ITN, from the ITN Comprise. But I really, really like it because it shows you in the table of contents and you can download the whole strategy, what they are looking at. And what I would advise you is if you write, we are going to have this deliverable, a dissemination strategy for the dissemination of our calls. And we are going to list the different channels. We are going to have key performance indicators. We are going to have an approximate timeline or so on. This will give evaluators, hopefully, the idea, okay, you thought this through and you know what you're doing there in order to be able to really attract the best researchers because you really want the best ones. Dissemination of the call, again, give details. Of course, your access, classical channels such as Nature Jobs, jobs.ac.uk, find a PhD, and so on. Those are the classics. But I would, if your institution is going to run a co-fund that is for some fields, that is fine. But then list also journals for these fields. The other thing is, I would also say you're not going to publish everywhere the job ads, but make it sort of part of a strategy, and you're going to have a whole electronic kit. This is the information we're going to send out. And you're going to be able, via potential supervisors, PIs, all your institution staff, the partner organizations, to disseminate such a kit also via conferences or via the networks. Because what we found at EMPA, we had a whole number of applications, really very nice, but many of these did not quite meet the target. And what we found eventually was if we go via field-specific networks, so newsletters, for example, or job ads in particular, news journals, that provided a much better turnout of targeted applications. Please also take into account if you are working in a field where one or the other gender is still underrepresented. In many fields that can be female researchers, try to find specific dissemination channels for female researchers. I put here one example, but of course, if for your fields, there can be many others. Also particularly mention researchers at risks, so refugees, researchers from widening countries. Be careful, of course, your program is going to be open for everybody, but you can show in how far you're going to make specific efforts to attract researchers who are still underrepresented, for example, women. For social media, don't just write, well, we're going to publish our job ads on social media, but be precise which channels, Facebook, Instagram. Also take into account your partner organizations. Of course, you want to work with them because then you can, you have a whole new leverage and you can reach far more people. And I saw that in Bogdan's presentation, you specifically also worked with the Scientific and Technology Ambassadors of Spain. Of course, if there's such a network, go ahead and contact them beforehand. Ask them, would you be interested to disseminate or to help us disseminate our call information? That can be a very nice plus. So be precise here, offer our list. And combine that then with the information that you're going to provide for applicants. And you can say what you're going to put on the website. You have my list here on this slide, but I thought I can give you this list. Let's have a look at a best practice example. It's the fellowship program Edge. It's hosted in Ireland. I think they closed all of their call for proposals now. But they have a really nice, clear website, and it shows you all the information that they put on there. And the information that they have here, they most likely put this information already in the proposal. We are going to put on our website information about the institutes and research centers, information about the Marie Skłodowska-Curie program and the link to our program. We're going to put information there about working and living in Ireland and so on. This is the level of detail you're going to outline in the proposal. What else I really liked about the website, see, they put down there here the application documents. They have a very nice workflow for the evaluation and selection openly available. And this is something, I don't know that for sure, but it looks to me like a graphic that could have been put in the proposal. So you should put something similar like that also in your proposal to make it crystal clear for evaluators. You know which step you're going to take when. Check out their website, it's a nice example. And go into details, give a short outline about what your documents, you just said maybe on our website we're going to have the guide for applicants and a guide for evaluators. Give 2 or 3 lines, what will this comprise? Give 2 or 3 lines, what will you give in terms of training description? What kind of application support? An FAQ, a help desk, maybe a video, maybe a live streamed briefing, something like that. Which application portal will you use or set up? Redress procedure, don't forget about it now. People have the right, of course, to call in for a redress if they think their application hasn't been handled properly. Explain already now, before even your call opens, more or less, on the website, how is this redress procedure going to be. For the eligibility criteria, in general, of course, follow the MSCA criteria, but explicitly mention also your provisions for people who had career breaks, provisions for researchers at risks. It isn't hurt to also speak about the eligibility of supervisors, or who are your supervisors going to be, and ethics. What are your ethics requirements? I put here another point, that is eligibility of partner organizations for secondments. You could put this elsewhere as well, but it won't hurt to put information about the partner organizations if you already have them specified. If not, if you allow for the fellows, which is a lovely idea, that they could propose a good suitable secondment institution, what kind of conditions would that be, or how is it decided if they can propose this partner organization or not? And after having been over a couple of proposals, I found this year is usually a good spot to also add a short timeline, not yet the complete Gantt chart, but a short timeline of the calls here, of the timing of the different calls. The selection process, which is so important. The guide for applicants asks you to point out the composition of all the committees who are involved in the different stages of your process, the selection of experts, how do you find your evaluators, and then the workflow. Make a clear reference, all committees ideally should be gender balanced, or show what you're doing to ensure they are as gender balanced as possible, and a clear reference to charter and code. We just saw that HRS for R is really important also, so it doesn't hurt to explain, okay, we respect all these rules and criteria. And then go into detail. Who is doing the eligibility check? What about ethics? If you have, in the case of a PhD program, more or less predefined topics, if that makes sense for you, have these been pre-assessed ethically? Yes, no, in most cases I would say yes. But how do you deal with ethics in the case of a fellowship proposal where the fellows should be absolutely free to define their topics and bring on their topics? Who is in your ethics board? According which lines do you do the ethics assessment? I would strongly suggest you say with the application there's going to be an ethics self-assessment, just like for the Marie Skłodowska-Curie individual fellowships, but we follow this up with our ethics procedure. Peer review, the application process should be as internationally open peer-reviewed as possible. At EMPA, but I have to say that was a proposal that was handed in 2016, so give even more effort to the international aspect of the peer review. have at least, I would say out of 3 evaluators, have at least 2 internationally. In EMPA, we have it the other way around, but we have a very strong internal selection committee, a research commission. However, today I would say have at least out of 3 reviewers, at least 2 international, but that's just my personal opinion. And give an estimation how many evaluators you're going to need. I have a short calculation for you there, because you think, well, okay, let's have one call with 20 positions. At the very least, you would aim at least 40 good applications, hopefully many more, but at the very least 40. Then you can calculate, okay, if they are all from different fields, I'm going to need different evaluators. Let's say really the maximum, they're in fields which are wide apart. So 40 different topics, that means 3 times 40 different evaluators. That's sort of the extreme. That would mean you would need to aim at least 120 evaluators. However, evaluators, of course, should be able also to review several proposals if it makes sense scientifically and regarding their expertise, because then they can compare the evaluations among themselves. But still, I would say you're going to need at least 80 evaluators. The other thing is aim at a high number of evaluators, because evaluators have a lack of time. They really want to help you evaluate the proposals, but they are really busy with other things. They fall sick. All of these things in 3 calls that I helped set up the evaluation process for the MPAT postdocs program. We always had evaluators who had to drop out, and not because they're evil people, but because they had upcoming things that nobody could foresee. So have more evaluators than you think you need now, and then you'll be fine. 2-phase evaluation. Ask yourself, are we going to have a written and an interview phase? In most cases, I would recommend it. And specify who is taking part in which. Do you want the supervisors on board? Yes or no? With which rights? Yes or no? This depends. Define already now is going to be in your redress committee. Who establishes the rankings? You should have a main list for funding and a reserve list, because the very good candidates, they apply elsewhere as well. So you always risk that you have 1 or 2 people dropping out, and then you need the next best candidates. Clearly specify in the proposal who's taking eventually the funding decision, and EMPA, that is really in a very high level, that's the board of directors, based upon the recommendation that, of course, the project management team gives them the ranking lists. But technically it is them, and you have to specify who eventually has the funding decision. And also be clear what kind of feedback you're going to give to the applicants, and write this in the proposal. At which point of time do you give them what kind of feedback? Ideally, after the eligibility check, to let them know, yes, you're eligible, or not, due to which reasons. After the written evaluation phase, and after the interview phase, if you have these 2 phases. For the evaluators, because that is the whole evaluation process stands and falls with the evaluators. So here's my recommendation for this. But then really specify also who and how will assign the proposals to the experts. And again, my recommendation, if feasible for your organization and for your setup, would be have either an evaluation, well, an allocation panel, have high-level experts, and try to follow what the MSCA write, because they work with keywords and the abstracts. And we found this, okay, this makes sense. This is feasible also for our program. But make sure this is a process that works internally and guarantees high-level quality choice of the experts. How do you brief your experts? I would suggest have a briefing with them. You can do that live streamed or in the form of a webinar, but give them also a sort of tutorial. For the interviews, specify when they will take place in the whole time frame, and will they be remotely or in place. For our project, we had it at the moment in a mixed way. Wherever possible, we try to invite the evaluators and the fellows in-house, but that's of course not always possible. So we more and more had also remote interviews. And specify, will HR be part in the interviews, or do you have a specific additional HR interview? Both is possible, with a specific additional HR interview, the whole process gets more complicated, but it depends on what your institution wishes and what makes sense for you. And during the evaluation process, call upon the experts, make them commit to the evaluation. You should have them sign something like a code of conduct. Again, you can check what the H2020, what the European Commission asks for evaluators in these terms, and you can follow it or do something similar. This ties in a little bit with the question about should evaluators be reimbursed or at least give them a sort of recognition fee, because you want the best evaluators, you want them to commit, and it's also simply a good sign of also we recognize this is a lot of hard work. So we give you sort of a token of recognition and specify in the proposal, we are going to avoid any kind of conflict of interests. What is a conflict of interest? And again, my recommendation is look up what the European Commission defines as conflict of interest. Phrase is something similar. But check this, you might have an integrity officer or so at your institutions. What do they say? What is their best practice? But define it in the proposal. And then you have already a huge, very important part, and you're going to continue with the evaluation criteria. Again, I would recommend to have a clear reference to Charter and Code. And think already now, will you add reference letters or not to your application? There are a couple of pros and cons. I found by now, and speaking with a couple of PIs, that on the PhD level, reference letters are still very much wished for. On postdoctoral level, not in all cases. What we found, we asked for 2 reference letters. They were so often, unfortunately, rather generic and always on the top level, which is nice. In a few cases, but then they didn't say a lot. But in a few cases where a researcher was not able to have 2 stellar reference letters, that already showed, okay, maybe that is not the best sign. But make up your mind and talk to your PIs. Do they wish to see external reference letters, yes or no? How are you going to, what kind of weight are you going to give that to the application? You have to define that here. My general goal is, my general aim would be, again, orientate your evaluation criteria towards the Marie-Skłodowska-Curie IF criteria. But if you have an oral phase, the interview phase, you have to bring that in as well. Give, for all of the evaluation criteria, really the exact content, the threshold, if you have a threshold applied, and the weight, and the scoring, make it rather simple. If that is best practice in your institution, you can use a score from 0 to 5. What you should do in the proposal is to give a clear definition. These are my criteria, and this is what I'm going to look at in the evaluation. And if you have a table or a list like this, you can take it just as it is, put it in the guide for your evaluators and say, these are our criteria. And this is the weight, and it's up to you to define that. And my recommendation is speak with your PIs and speak with your HR people to define all these. Have this specified for the written proposal, for the interview, and of course the final score. The final score, how does it consist? If you have 2 phases, then is it 50-50? Do you give more weight to the interview or more weight to the written evaluation? That will also vary for sure between PhD programs and postdoctoral programs. And this is just a random example I put here. But in most cases, you would want to ask, of course, the scientific quality of the candidate, but maybe also leadership skills. For oral communication, one tip here, you could have as one of the eligibility criteria an English knowledge test. That would mean that everybody who you invite eventually to your interview should be able to communicate fluently in English. However, if you don't do that, do you evaluate the English knowledge as well? But what do you do if you have a very good candidate, but his or her English is not that good? Think these details through. What is it that you want to do eventually? And one of the last parts of this first excellence criterion is the equal opportunities. The guide for applicants points out what you should do there. What I find interesting here is in the first sentence, equal opportunities should be understood in its widest sense. And that is not only gender policy, but you can widen it to diversity in general. And clearly, ensure that you write, we are not discriminating against anybody from a different nationality, religion, gender, sexual orientation, ethnicity, and so on and so on. Do point that out, what kind of equal opportunities policy not only you have as the main funding body or the main beneficiary, but also eventual partner organizations, and show how you apply this whole strategy of equal opportunities throughout the whole project. So the dissemination of the call, the selection and recruitment, how you're going to implement the strategy when the fellows are there, possibly how you reach out during public engagement activities, training that you make your fellows aware of equal opportunities and diversion and inclusion in the workplace and research specifically. So try to take an overall perspective on this. And then you have written, I'd say, at least a third of your proposal. And you might be scared because your whole proposal is only 30 pages and you already spent a lot on this. But this is the most important part. Excellence 1.2 is now the part that very often people find a little easier to write, because it's not so much about the different steps of the evaluation process, but about the research. You can describe how brilliant all your institutions are and what you're going to offer in terms of training, but make it appealing to evaluators. So really clearly serve them the arguments. Why is it that fellows should come to us? How are you embedded, your institution or your COFUND setup, in the international landscape, in the national, maybe in the regional RD&I landscape? If you want to, and if it makes sense, you can link to UN Sustainable Development Goals or to the Future Horizon Europe clusters. Make a link to how you're going to embed the COFUND training and research into existing training and research going on in your institution. Show the secondment options. For a PhD program, just as Alan said before, if you have many PhD positions, you can offer a list if that is suitable for your field, but make clear that you don't have 10 positions for, no, 10 options for 10 positions, but at least 20 for 10 people that eventually you want to have. I really like if you, well, I would like to read it if you could really embed your research in the UN SDG. You can explain how that makes sense. But maybe you have some, you know, some field-specific context that makes sense for you. For example, for material sciences, I looked up papers and policy papers and strategies from, you know, from material science bigger bodies, so for the World Association, things like that, and I pointed out, okay, this is important because, but I did not only point it out for overall, where you can say material sciences is important, but I tried to break it down, why is it important for Europe? And this is where, for example, current ongoing Horizon 2020 work programs you can use these arguments there to undermine, to show why our research is so important, or you can have a look out on the future funding program. Yeah. We spoke now about research, but the largest part, of course, is the training. And be careful here, because this is one of the core, the other core. You have the selection and evaluation, and the other core is really the training and the supervision of your fellows. And Bogdan just said it beforehand, okay, make it really everything that you do, make it for the fellow. And we try always, when I help with the proposal, to also follow that in dubio pro fellow. So what is it that you offer to these brilliant people? Give all the details. For PhD programs, if you have predefined topics, it might make sense to already predefine supervisors. One supervisor is not so much the state of the art anymore. I would recommend to have 2 to 3 supervisors from a different discipline, for example, or during the secondment. And if you have that, you can argue well that you respect the III, so international, interdisciplinary, and intersectoral dimension. And this will come back again. Your supervisors are the most important person for the fellow, so they all should be trained and on a very high level. For those who are still junior supervisors, great, but in these cases, you should point out that you have provisions, you train your supervisors themselves. And I think Bogdan had that also included in his presentation. Maybe it makes sense to also specify already in the proposal not only the supervisors, but we are going to give our newly arrived fellows a colleague at hand for the rather informal aspects of getting to a new group. Give a track record of supervisors if you can individually, if you cannot at least collectively. That sort of ties in with the eligibility of a supervisor. Specify their roles and specify, especially, well, the main supervisor has one say. What does the code supervisor say? How many rights has the secondment supervisor? Write all that down. And of course, the whole supervision should be linked to a personal career development plan. If you mention this, explain on which kind of model you're basing this. There's one that was used during, or that is outlined in the LERO consortium agreement for ITNs, but maybe your institution has an own model that you use already. Explain what's going to be in there, how often you're going to revise this. If a fellow falls short on the goals for his or her training, what you're going to do, what kind of quality and monitoring mechanisms would you have. And especially for PhD programs, of course, every PhD student has to be enrolled in a PhD program, and that's the goal. But that's the goal, and then there's life. It might be that your fellows cannot finish their thesis or do not want to, so your goal is not that they submit actually a thesis, but that they get an overall training of the student. For the postdoctoral fellows, that of course is different. I gave you here a fun example of how you could, for example, show the qualification of supervisors. Don't go overboard with this. If you have 20 supervisors, you could come up with a list of maybe 10 or so, give also a collective statement. But something like this that would show to your evaluators, okay, these are really stellar people there. And then the training. That is important. We already saw it's not only about the research skills, but of course, with the whole integrative approach, you're going to have a lot of weight also on transferable skills. And my main recommendation is here, first define your training objectives. And this you can do when you also show who your future employers are. This works a little bit better when you have rather field-specific COFUND. Again, I use my example. We could pretty clearly say where future material science scientists will work eventually. We could even name drop some companies or so, but this depends a little bit on your setup. It might make sense to have a whole training coordinator or to clearly point out in the proposal, we are working together with our in-house training unit, and then explain and have a clear training model. How much are the students going to do and when? Define the training goals and try to develop a whole integrated vision of the training. Clearly state they are going to spend, I don't know, 50 hours on transferable skills training out of a pool of these and these offers. We make it mandatory, or we encourage them to have at least 2 training courses in open access and ethics, or whatever. How you define it should make sense for whom you train your researchers. And this can only be done if you have a real clear training vision. And if you have that, it's going to be much easier later to motivate your students to follow this training vision. To have some inspiration for this, I give you here a link to a study from Euraxint, very interesting, where researchers end up other than academia, their future occupations. And for transferable skills, I always like to point out this wheel of transferable skills, or what makes a good researcher a really good researcher, by the UK Foundation Vitae. And you can look at this and take elements which make sense for you and your students. And this is the most important part, the excellence part. I have something like 60, 70 minutes left, but don't worry, I'm going to go much shorter about this chapter 2 and 3. Just to remind you, the European Commission defines in the work program of the Marie Skłodowska Career Action 3 levels of impact. So the individual researcher, the institution, and that is particularly important for COFUND as well, and ideally a European and global level. And if you compare this with Impact 2.1, you see this, the potential and future career prospects of the researcher, but also strengthening human resources on regional level, national or international level. So, go back to your training. You already had a look at who is going to be future employers. Employability is going to be key here. And if you have a good training plan, you can take the elements of the training plan here again and say, they're going to have this and this impact on the researcher, on the institution, and on a higher level. Link back to any kind of policy papers for employability, the need of researchers in these areas. If in section 1 you refer to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, you can take that back again here, for example. And then there is a part where you are asked to show in how far your project helps to align the practices of participating organizations with the principles for human resources development and research and innovation. So essentially, why is it important that you train talent, that you have new talent? My advice here is make a table or a list for a PhD program where you show these are the principles of the innovative doctoral trainings, and it's applied in our program in this and this form. Make it short and concise, or make it possible for evaluators to find this information. And you can also, of course, link to the European Charter of Researchers and the Code and Conduct for the recruitment of researchers. This would more apply for a fellowship program. And impact 2.3, exploitation and dissemination. My general tip is here, don't just list, yes, we are going to have channels for dissemination, but develop a whole strategy again, just like in the very beginning, with input ideally from the experts at your institution, from the Technology Transfer Office, alongside the Plan for Exploitation and Dissemination published by the European IPR Help Desk. Look it up. You can find it here, there's a fact sheet, and I find it quite useful. And then you can point out in the proposal, we're going to more or less follow these recommendations. This is what our plan approximately will entail. And you train your researchers in proper exploitation and dissemination as well. For dissemination, I would recommend, I love tables. Don't go overboard with tables. You can represent this differently as well. Which kind of scientific target groups would you have? Not only academia, but also industry, so non-academia, or for example, policymakers. How are you going to reach out to them, and how are you going to measure if you were successful? So sort of key performance indicator. And be clear, we're going to develop a timeline. This is how we monitor this. Also give clear information about open access publishing and information on IP and data management plan. And impact 2.4 is similar, but geared towards communication and public outreach, public engagement. Again, I would combine this with a whole strategy or put up a separate communication strategy. Try to come up with new ideas and be very clear what do you expect from the fellows to deliver, both in terms of dissemination and also communication activities. Clearly write sentences, bold, underlined in the proposal. We expect our fellows to take part in at least one communication event per year or so. This will depend on what you usually can expect from the fellows. They should have a training, be in communication and, for example, also in open access publishing. And be careful for communication. If you write, we expect them in every year to be active in at least one event, then make the communication training also one of the first ones. If you make it in their last year, it doesn't add up. And build back on what your institution already offers and has, and also the partner institutions. Maybe they have huge outreach events, things like open door days, or they take regular part in a European Researchers' Night. Show to evaluators, okay, we're not pulling this out of thin air, but we have something to build on. You can, again, have a sort of table or an overview. Give examples, where are the institutions already active? And the last evaluation criteria is implementation. This is sort of, if you declined, or if you define already clearly your training and future employers, potential employers, and the impact, this sort of dribbles down to the implementation, because if everything else is clear, who's doing what and when, this will make it much easier then to show now the different work packages. And the Guide for Applicants is very clear here. They give you the work plan, what you have to describe in the Gantt chart. There's no need to make this super fancy, but make it clear. Milestones and deliverables. I put you a couple of examples. Very often there's some sort of confusion of what a milestone is. That is a stepping stone for any kind of future action in the project, whereas the deliverable is typically something that you actually deliver in the form of a report, which you upload to the European Commission's portal. For example, a good milestone would be the setup of a website, whereas a deliverable linked to that would be a report on the annual communication activities. The management structure, I think what evaluators like to see, I never evaluated myself, but I think what I like to see is clarity, and that it's very clear who has decision power and who reports to whom. And clear also how often do the different bodies meet. Are they more or less gender balanced? They should be. Keep it as simple as possible, but adapted to the needs of your project. This is one example how you could set up these things, but it's just one example. There's a whole variety. In my opinion, the simpler the better, but really this depends on your institution and on your COFUND. A good tip, however, is by now to have an external advisory board added, people who are experts in higher education and also in your fields, and who can help you monitor the progress and the quality of your overall project. You could say they meet once a year and they give us input, they help us improving the whole thing. The web packages, the Guide for Applicants defines the first 3 months you have to have. I usually, and there's also ethics that will be added. I usually like to have something like impact, where you say, okay, we really also give dedicated focus to our dissemination, communication activities, to our exploitation, to the overall impact which our fellows eventually will have, and our project as a whole. Risk management. The Guide for Applicants gives you one clear table. It's a good table. You can do an even better one if you differentiate between mitigation. So what are you going to do that a risk doesn't even occur? And contingency measures. What are you going to do if it should have occurred after all? Typical risks in a COFUND: not attracting enough fellows, enough good high-level quality fellows, maybe not meeting our gender target, don't have a quota, but have a target. Supervisors or fellows dropping out. Go through all the different aspects of your proposal and think, okay, what could happen in the worst case and what are we doing then? Leave out any kind of politics. That is not what the evaluators are looking for. It's not your responsibility to foresee any huge politics changes. That is fine. Brexit or not, it's not in your responsibility. The Gantt chart, keep it clear and simple and do what the Guide for Applicants says, but you can add, for example, also things like when you're going to reviewing the whole project, or if you have summer schools or larger training events, that can be helpful to have that here as well. And the last 2 parts, the first one is about the employment conditions of researchers. Spell it out, and I think here is a good part where you can say, okay, this is why our project is so interesting and attractive for fellows. We treat them well, really well, with our working conditions, with all the support that we give them, our employment conditions. And we are in line with the Spanish national regulations, of course. That means, spell it out a little bit. Evaluators won't know what Spanish national law is for employment, for example. So give a little bit of background there. And here, one tip, be precise again. For example, you could say something, this will also come for the budget. This is our living allowance, and then clearly specify things like the living allowance is going to be transformed into a salary, which is directly paid into the fellow's account. Give details like that. Speak to your financial department, speak to your HR people, how are we dealing with these things? Give details. The financial management, of course, it's according to the grant agreement. Be clear who manages the financial aspects and who supports the project coordinator or manager, your financial unit, somebody with a lot of experience, previous experience for other grants, of course, is welcome here. And be clear now, already talk now over how you're going to distribute the budget, for example, to the partner organizations if they host somebody during secondments. Is the fellow going to remain employed with you, yes or no, for how long, research costs, things like that. It's good practice to not only give the normal budget table that is required, but you can think a little bit further and, for example, also make a breakdown of budget regarding to a management or researcher budget breakdown. And there again, I put, for example, reviewer fees. I show in the proposal already, this is approximately what we're estimating for the reviewer fees. This is approximately what you're estimating for job advertisements. for the website, things like that. Think this through. It will help convince evaluators that you know what you're doing, and it's extremely helpful if you have such a proposal, such a table in your grant agreement, because later if somebody comes and says, oh, you have a nice management budget, can I have something? No, 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 no. See, we also need it, and also that wouldn't be legal. So this is for our project. And 3.3 is where you show again why your beneficiary and together with the partner organizations is really the best. I'm a lady who likes her tables, but that doesn't mean that you have to do similar, but spell it out for evaluators in a clear way. We offer this in terms of admin support, in terms of technical support, in terms of HR support, make references again to HRS4R or your access. Bring everything that you can to the table. And you will conclude with a last short chapter on support offered to applicants, where you sort of go through all of your proposal again and pick out, this is what we're doing for our future fellows, and we help them. And maybe if you want to develop a vision for your future, show also here. And by the way, we're just not stopping after 4 or 5 years or so. We think further ahead, and we reach out to all stakeholders, and we make a huge final conference, things like that. We show we not only just want to have the money for the fellows, but we really want to do something with that. Right. Cross-cutting issues throughout the proposal. Have a look what applies for you and what doesn't. And letters of commitment, be precise there. Have them, if you try a resubmission, have them from this year. Make your partner organizations specify what they're really going to do. Financial contribution, if they give something, should be specified here how much. And for project management, I think a lot of this I already tried to incorporate, but I found that it's stands and falls with good communication internal and with also with a project officer. This is why I said right at the beginning, speak to your people internally and with the people at the host institutions, at the partner institutions. The call preparation, I can promise you the minute the call is open, even beforehand, you will have the first inquiries. So be ready. Do yourself a favor, don't open a call on a Friday, open it on a Monday. Makes sense. Evaluators, I tried to say that already, have more evaluators now than you think you're going to need. You're going to need more because these poor people have a lot on the plate. Also for evaluators, try to take into account if they come from academia, but also have as many as possible from non-academia, gender balanced where possible, international. Yeah, I think that was it, yes. Have a very good pool of evaluators. Implementation, brief your fellows well, maintain a good communication flow with them. Again, I think as many of these projects, a lot comes down to communication. They need to know you or your project management team in case when they could ask questions. Try to build up a sort of a network. For example, also after they left again via LinkedIn, have a good fun midterm meeting. And for audits, if you keep everything, that is already the first step. Keep all the records of the evaluation process and of the eligibility checks. Brief the fellows, they should keep all the training proofs and make sure they acknowledge the proper EU funding in their publications. I listed here a little bit more info on audits, but for that, you can also come back to me later if needed. General best practice tips, really try to align your COFUND procedures with your internal procedures and vice versa. This will pay off. Keep a good communication flow with basically everybody involved. Be ready when your call is open. Never are too many evaluators. Plan buffer time for all the steps of the evaluation process. Don't have it too long, because then the very good people will find another job. Don't have it too short, because it could happen that somebody crucial falls sick for a day or two. You don't want then a huge delay. Good communication. I cannot repeat that enough. Keep all records of everything and all the time in a findable way. And when the fellows are there and you're deep in the trenches of project administration, it doesn't hurt from time to time to take a step back and admire the fellows, what they are doing, because they are doing excellent, stellar work, and eventually it's you who is enabling the work. So, there is more or less my input. I hope you found it useful. Useful documents. If you read your proposal, have a look at the self-evaluation form. It's published on the Funding and Tenders portal. And Net for Mobility Plus, the project by the NCPs, issues every year a wonderful writing handbook. I don't think it's yet out for the new call, but you can use, as long as it's not yet there, the version for 29, both for doctoral and for fellowship projects. You don't have to follow everything in there, but there are a couple of really good ideas and guidance. And yes, it's absolutely possible to write with that at hand and with all the expertise that you have at your institution. Good competitive proposals. So best of luck. Don't be shy, you can contact me. And I look forward then to hearing next year's Spanish results.
Thank you so much, Julian. Let's see if we have some questions. Is Christina writing? I think your presentation was really to the point and really clear and with amazing tips for future proposals. I would say if some of you are preparing a COFUND and you need an expert, you have Julian, you know, is a very good reputation, experience, and I want to thank you to share your expertise with us and with all the participants. I want to thank you, Alan, for sure, with your presentation and your description and advice. And finally, for sure, Bogdan. I think it was a great info day session. In these weird times, we are waiting for the new normality. I would say also for those who are from Madrid, in Madrid Más Day, we have like a small budget for review proposals. So if you are preparing a COFUND, my institution has some small budget for help you for the review of the proposal. So if you have any doubt, you can contact me and we can set up some expert to review your proposal. So it's not a huge amount of money, but we have something to use in this COFUND call. Once again, thank you all the participants and Christina for support all the webinars and the virtual session we are having in the last 2 months. It's very exhausting and we are waiting for the normality. I don't know if we have any other question. Okay. I have a question, Julian. What is your opinion? Because someone asked about to pay or not to pay evaluator. What is your experience with evaluators? Because I have my own experience with payments with evaluators, but maybe if you can give us some light about this.
Yes, thank you. I would say definitely do give evaluators some kind of fee and make that clear right from the beginning when you contact them first. Because I can tell you at AMPA we set a funds aside approximately 190 Swiss francs, something like, I don't know, 195 euro or so per evaluated proposal. And it's not that we didn't want to show that we pay them for their work, because that evaluation is a lot more work than that. We wanted to say, we take your work seriously, we acknowledge that this is a work, we want to thank you a little bit. And it's also, I think, some psychological movement there. If they know they can expect a little bit of money, they take it even more seriously. Although I must say, the evaluators we had did take it extremely seriously. And they are just so grateful, and you want to need them for another call. So they will be ever so grateful and thankful. I think it's good practice simply to do that. It's up to you how much. It depends on the length and the complexity of the application, of course. But to my knowledge, evaluators were really extremely grateful. Not so much the amount of money, but really the fact, yes, we know you are doing excellent work there. You're doing great work.
Thank you, Julian. And Christina, I don't know if you want to say some words.
No, I think the experts talked today. So thank you very much for being there and supporting all of us. And that's all from my side. Have a good day. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.